So now we've got Alex and Paul here, or Leah's going to talk to us first. Alex and Paul, and from Northingtons we've got Mark, Jonathan and Greg. So far away, Leah.
Good morning, councillors. I just wanted to start before I ask the Northington team to come down and just go over their executive summary from their report, just to give a bit of a background about why we're here today. So on the 9th of December 2021, ironically, almost a year ago today, I sat in this council chamber and requested the councillors to ask CCHL to undertake a strategic review as part of their letter of expectations. At that time, we asked CCHL to consider the role of CCHL and asked them to reflect after nearly 30 years whether its original core purpose remains relevant and whether it could be enhanced to provide more support to the city. They were asked to consider this in light of the current environment our city's experiences over the last 10 years and the future national and global challenges we are all facing. Bit of history. Christchurch City Holdings was set up in 1993 to hold the commercial assets of the council and to provide a non-political buffer between council and its commercial entities. Commencing with South Power, which is now Orion, in 1993, over the next 3 years the shares of the airport, the port and Christchurch Transport were transferred via a combination of equity and debt into the holding structure. It wasn't until 2002 that CityCare was transferred, and then the creation of the Christchurch City Networks, now Enable, commenced in 2007. Over that time, CCHL has paid over $1.9 billion of dividends or capital returns to the city and shown an increase in total assets of the group to over $5.2 billion. So why are we doing a review? Because our landscape has changed and the next 30 years will not be like the past 30. That we can be sure of. We need to ensure we have learned from what the last 12 years has taught the city and prepare the future for what we need and what our children deserve. The Northern Report has challenged us all. It has challenged the council by asking if our rates increases going forward are sustainable. And it has asked us to question, why do we own these assets? Is it for security and control, for income generation, to increase asset value, or other non-financial benefits? It has challenged CCHL on whether it has achieved its role in monitoring and driving performance of our entities. And it has challenged whether the performance of our entities compares favourably with their sector peers. The Northington Report has challenged us all to learn from the past to inform our future. The 6 trading assets of CCHL are listed in our LTP as strategic assets. The definition of strategic assets is as follows. Strategic asset in relation to the assets held by a local authority means an asset or group of assets that the local authority needs to retain if the local authority is to maintain the local authority's capacity to achieve or promote any outcome that the local authority determines to be important to the current or future well-being of the community. The reason why any decision to remove any asset from the strategic asset list is required as part of an LTP is because that decision needs to be informed as part of our long-term thinking. It should not be a knee-jerk reaction to current circumstances, but a considered decision that needs to be well-informed and seek public guidance. The Northern Report has recommended that work is done to allow this council and our public to have the information it needs to make an informed decision as part of the 24 to 34 LTP considerations. Without the work being done to consider what our value strategy is for owning these assets and providing detailed options of what the possible opportunities and risks are from a rebalanced or a reduced portfolio, we will not have the information to make an informed decision to consider whether these assets are important to the current and future well-being of the community. The Northington Review has done exactly what a strategic review should do. It has asked the tough questions. It has challenged the status quo, and it has considered what the future looks like for our city. The Northington Review has provided recommendations to consider, but it doesn't give us the answers because we need to do some work first. This decision today is not about asset sales. This decision today is not about a knee-jerk reaction to our current economic environment. This decision today is about challenging ourselves to consider the needs of our community now and in the next 30 years. And on that note, I'm going to ask the Northington team to come up. And then if we get Northington to go through these, and then we can ask questions, and then we'll go on to the recommendations, if that's okay. You guys sit there.
Mayor, councillors, thanks for having us here again to present our report. We know the report's well read, so we intend today just to move reasonably quickly through the executive summary, and then happy to answer any questions that you might have. So we've worked for 3 months very closely with Council and CCHL on this review. It's a broad-based review of a range of aspects in relation to CCHL and its performance. We've looked at strategy and scope, we've looked at financial performance, and we've looked at structure and governance. The review is best framed as asking and answering two key questions. How is CCHL working at the moment? And more broadly, how could and should it be working in the future to best serve the city? As part of the review, we've consulted very widely. We've engaged with councillors and executive at CCHL and council level. We've talked to the CCTO subsidiary businesses, and also some external stakeholders as well. On the left-hand side of this slide, we just set out what's actually in CCHL. I think we're all very aware of that. It's a high-quality portfolio of infrastructure assets, significant equity value, about 3.3 billion at the moment. On the right-hand side of this slide here, we just put some context, which is really important for this review. And this highlights the council's fiscal position is changing. We've got an extended period of very high rates growth and increasing debt levels, and a fairly steep increase in forecast rates as well. We've closely reviewed the performance of CCHL and the operating subsidiaries here. I think it's best summarised that the performance of the assets has been pretty good. There are some exceptions in the portfolio, notably Littleton Port Company. These are historical issues, and City Care as well. Action has now been taken to improve the performance of those particular businesses. The performance of CCHL is best described as a holdco structure. It is an asset holder providing a monitoring and compliance function, and without being too harsh, has done little to sort of improve value on a portfolio basis by actively managing. That reflects, we think, what CCHL thinks it's meant to be doing, which is really just holding assets. We've also looked at a number of aspects of operational performance of CCHL. As Leo pointed out, it provides a very critical political buffer between the council and the trading assets. In our interviews and discussions with all of the stakeholders that we've consulted with, that is universally valued, and we believe that's a very important feature of the structure as well. It has been widely noted that the engagement between CCHL and the subsidiaries and council has not been as good as it could be, and we think there are some actions that need to be taken to improve that engagement and transparency. To help frame some of the options that we've considered in the resetting of CCHL, we've gone back to basics to ask some existential questions which really relate to council's ownership of these assets. Why does council own these commercial assets? We believe the response to that question falls into one of four categories, which we've set out here. Security and control of key infrastructure assets, the delivery of income and value to the city, and then on the far right there, supporting non-financial objectives of the council. We've then tested each of these reasons to try and determine whether this rationale is well supported and fit for purpose in this current structure. If we just start on the right, the expectation that these commercial entities deliver non-financial value and objectives to the community, they do, but they do inside any normal commercial operating environment that we would expect to see in competitor style businesses. So each of those businesses does pursue ESG and corporate social responsibility initiatives, but we see that broadly across the market now, regardless of ownership structure. Moving back to to number one there, just in relation to the security and control of assets, I think that's the key findings there for these particular types of assets in this portfolio is that you don't need to own 100% of these regulated, most of the portfolio regulated assets to maintain a good level of control of the assets. And then probably the two most important facets here, generating income for the council and building value. The portfolio has generated a consistent stream of dividends, but it's a reasonably low yield on the portfolio. It's less than 2% on total asset value. If generating income was the key objective of this portfolio, it's not optimised to deliver on that objective. And then coming to the building of value, it's a great goal, but the related question is, who will benefit from that value? And as we've moved through the review, this has become one of the most significant aspects, and it really relates to the question to council around a value strategy. How does it plan to access that value through time, and who will benefit? Is it ratepayers in the next 5 or 10 years, or is it in a longer term than that, out 10 or 20 or 30 years? There's not a clear, deliberate strategy around the building and using of that value, and that's a central theme in this review. We've looked at a range of options in terms of repositioning the CCHL portfolio, and they fall along a spectrum. On the left-hand side here is retain the status quo, which is a static portfolio of assets. There are, as we'll get to, some operational benefits which we think can be effected inside the structure to improve governance, some level of performance, and certainly stakeholder engagement. Rebalance is, we've done some analysis to look at the options to recycle capital inside the portfolio. That is essentially taking capital, introducing co-investors into some of these assets and deploying that capital into other assets that might generate higher income and higher value through time. The reduced scenario is the same accessing of capital, but instead of redeploying that inside the portfolio, some or all of that released capital could be sent back to council to reduce debt and or be redeployed elsewhere. And then on the far right is the counterfactual to owning assets, which is effectively to realise or sell the whole portfolio. We're not advocating that, but it is a useful exercise to to observe what that might look like at a financial level, certainly. Our recommended approach at this stage to management of the CCHL portfolio is that Council considers a hybrid approach, which is effectively a combination of the rebalance and the reduce. So it would involve the introduction of strategic co-investors. It would release some capital, some would be reinvested in CCHL, and some would be sent back to Council. The immediate question is, well, how do you determine the balance between those two paths? And two things need to happen to really inform that. The first is the value strategy. We think the Council needs to do a piece of work to determine in the long term, and this is within the next LTP, but also an extended period, what it's really trying to get in terms of ultimate capital structure, what's an acceptable debt profile, and what's an acceptable rates path. Once it has the answer to those questions, it's then in a position to inform what the CCHL portfolio really needs to look like to deliver on those objectives. So in parallel, we would recommend that CCHL, working closely with Council, embarks on some scoping studies of the subsidiaries to determine what the real opportunities at the subsidiary level are for the introduction of co-investors and optimising the performance of those assets. At the same time, also considering how it might redeploy released capital into other investments. So the core output from these two connected processes should be a range of explicit and market-tested options for introducing co-investment into the current CCHL assets and redeploying the released capital. Regardless of the actual model and portfolio that's ultimately pursued, there are a range of operational improvements at the CCHL level and at Council level that would improve the relationship. We think we've talked about some of those already, and they roll into the value strategy. But the other notable ones on this list of recommendations that under setting and balancing objectives, that the Council introduces a much more comprehensive statement of expectation process, which is done every 3 years and rolls in and aligns with Council's 10-year LTP. And that statement of expectations should be very explicit in terms of what Council expects CCHL to deliver. So that's financial and non-financial initiatives and objectives. In relation to governance, we would suggest reducing the number of councillor directors from 4 to 2 in order to enhance the collective board capability, but still maintaining those highly valued links between Council and CCHL. We think 2 is sufficient to do that. But it also opens up the opportunity to really enhance the capability of the board. And then the last one here, we think that CCHL really needs to, this is under communication and engagement, really needs to commit to a higher level engagement with the executive, between the executive, the board and the council to enhance transparency, communication and trust. This is very related to the reduction in the suggested reduction in the number of councillor directors. We think those links and the visibility, the perception of reducing the number of councillor directors might throw that into question. We think processes of bringing CCTOs in front of the council on a regular basis, maybe every 6 months, to perform those sort of operational briefings would go a long way to improving that transparency and visibility for council. So that's the potted summary of the exec sum. We're happy to take any questions.
Right, so thank you, Mel. Vic, were you asking a question, or is it an old piece of paper I've got here? So Tyler first, please, then Melanie.
Thank you for all of your work that you've done on this. I've just got a question in regards to making the decision today instead of making decisions on recommending this report in January. Will you be working over the Christmas break if we made a decision today?
The intention is not to be. No, and I don't think the decision today has any impact directly on us. We're not engaged or otherwise in terms of further work.
I just wanted to clarify that though, because what the recommendation today is not asking Northingtons to do any further work.
Okay.
The recommendation is asking CCHL or council to undertake some work, but also CCHL to undertake the work. So it's not asking Northingtons to do more.
So would it be annoying of me to recommend that we move it to January, Leah? So the next meetings?
The concern I have with that is that, and the reason why this is here now, while we are coming through to the council now, is because we need to very quickly if this goes through today, we need to get the board in place to actually start doing this work. There's a because we need this to feed into our long-term plan decision making and consideration, and we need to also go through a process as in line with your appointments process to appoint those directors in place. That is going to take time, as well as your councillor directors, and then they need to get up and get into this work. This is a substantial amount of work. If we don't have a decision before end of January, when the next council meeting is, then you're delaying it. We've just lost another month. That's my concern. We're working on the basis that the panel will be in place, and the interview, especially the council directors, will be done in January. Okay.
And in terms of the value strategy, what's the timeline on that you'd think would be implementing that in line with this piece of work?
So we need to. So that's a substantial bit of work that we need to do around this table, and so we will work to actually getting a timeline for that in the next. In January, we'll start working, putting something in the diaries to actually work through that workshop with you guys.
Okay, that's fine.
So it can go on a line with the director's appointments.
Okay.
Sorry, I've got 4 questions. First one is it talks about the geographic concentration in the report and the risks around that. Can you explain if that was a disadvantage sort of as we went through and recovered from the earthquakes? Because I would have thought that that's sort of a prime example of where the risk might be apparent.
Yeah, I guess it was borne out through the earthquake and the recovery process for the earthquake in terms of each of those subsidiary companies had a number of challenges which it needed to deal with, which had an immediate impact on performance and its ability to support the council through that process. Again, we go back to if we were starting to build this portfolio from scratch and we're looking at all the criteria that we're trying to meet, one of them would be geographic diversity, such that we're not exposed to a significant event in the same place.
Mm-hmm. And you talked at one stage, we've got highly regulated companies and companies that are unregulated and mixes in between. And it seems, and you sort of talk about how regulated companies were kept at the amount of profit and dividends that we can get, and then the unregulated companies are much more free to make the most of opportunities. But it looks like the most unregulated companies that we have currently are most poorly performing. So why is that what we've been seeing to date?
There are some issues with, I guess, the unregulated businesses in here. City Care has had some legacy issues. Littleton Port obviously has got some structural issues in the performance there that limit what it can deliver in terms of financial performance. If you compare the structure of Littleton Port in particular to some of its peers that have different operating structures, Port of Tauranga is a listed example with good visibility. There are marked differences in the way that they can actually deliver performance.
And if I can just add to that, so that's one of the key points that we got to, that active management would allow the owner, the shareholder, to move in and out of those assets. Yes, those unregulated assets are exposed to a greater risk profile and should provide a greater return, but without the ability to actively manage those, which we believe has been CCHL's mandate, then you are effectively stuck with them.
I was just wondering if you could, I've explained the hybrid approach. Like, it's obviously like a mixture of but can it be one way or the other? Or is it always a mix? That's how it appears.
The relative weighting between the two is going to be informed by the further work that needs to be done. What does the council actually need for this portfolio to deliver so that it can meet its long-term objectives? And once that question has been answered, then the relative mix between rebalance and reduce will be determined.
Right. And I was just wondering, do you know if there are any investors that are currently interested in putting any finances towards our CCOs?
I think there would be significant and very keen interest in some of the assets.
Thank you. Tim, on screen there, please, mate.
Thank you. A couple of my questions have been asked. I've only got a couple, which seem pretty kind of simple. But on with on our recommendations, 3F.1, it says that the CEOs should be coming to the council every 6 months, which is absolutely right. But I think that should we include the chairs of the board? So if we're talking about communication and understanding, we'd want that both with the board and with the senior management team. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think the intention would be that the engagement with the companies is at both the board and senior exec level. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you. And secondly, I mentioned it the other day, and it seems a small thing, but because they are owned by the people of Christchurch, with the AGMs, there seems to be, there's a distance between the owners, which are the ratepayers of Christchurch, and these companies, irrelevant of sell downs or diversification, etc. What are your thoughts with regards to these companies being more open with regards to the ownership or owners and having the AGMs live streamed in say council function room, which is open to the public?
Yeah, Tim, we think that's a good idea. Obviously, some matters maybe need to be excluded, but there's no reason that those briefings can't be structured in a way to open the level of transparency to everybody.
Thank you. And finally, the third one, and I've mentioned this before, that I see no point if we were to diverse, then it would be, my thing is to strategic partners, as you've kind of mentioned before, rather than just say a capital fund or whatever it is, because they don't add value. They just kind of clip the ticket, if you like, because they want a good firm asset that they can invest in. But if we're going to do something, we actually want to increase our portfolio and our return to the ratepayers. Your thoughts?
Absolutely, and that would be the intention of the scoping studies, is to really evaluate the options for introducing strategic co-investors that can bring value to the subsidiaries and the operating businesses that doesn't exist at the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. And Phil, I'd like to kind of throw that into the recommendations later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Sarah, and then Celeste.
Thanks so much. Just a query around the comments that Gary was making in the offer that he made. And I'm wondering, rather than stopping this process to talk to the gentleman concerned and then make decisions, whether it would be useful to just simply request that council get a briefing and that maybe CCHL meet with them or something like that.
Well, ultimately, that's council's choice. I mean, we have consulted widely, including the gentleman named, and so that's all incorporated into our view of the situation. I'm not suggesting that the history lesson isn't useful, but we're more focused on the looking forward and what do we do from here.
Yeah. It was probably more for Leah because I know there's a bit of,
So we could
We've had a
incorporate that,
deputation.
because we're going to need to do some workshops in regards to the value strategy. We could incorporate bringing that into it, because it will be good especially for the new councillors to have some of that history. So I'm happy to suggest that.
But you don't think that any of the previous history stuff would impact just the request to do the further work?
No.
No. Okay, thanks.
Celeste?
This is probably a question for Leah. Can you just remind me, just following on from the deputation this morning, the process for appointing Northingtons and also the terms of reference? How were they set? And can we get a copy of them?
Terms of reference are attached to your report. So that went public on Monday, and also it has been released a couple of times to media requests over the last month, so they have been public, terms of reference. In regards to the long involved process that has happened, back, as I said earlier, in December last year, we asked CCHL to undertake this review. They initiated a process by setting out a request for proposals out to the market, and they had responses to that. As we know, in the last year, there has been a number of changes in personnel at CCHL, and because the initial report was supposed to be completed by April, and we were asked to extend that, which we did, to July, and then we were till this timing, and then we were asked again to extend it again when the troubles happened, and we determined and came back to council to say that we do not believe that we cannot wait till March, April next year, which is when we were asked. And that was the decision that we came back to council with, to undertake it ourselves. In regards to the process, we took the request for the proposals that Christchurch City Holdings had already received to speed up the process, and actually interviewed those people and appointed Northingtons as part of that process. So it was a market process, but because we were up against the time, we didn't go back to market. We used the people that had responded the first time. So that's how they were appointed.
Aaron?
Yeah, a couple of questions just to clarify, and it's a bit of a follow-on from Sarah's point, is firstly, what would be the harm in us having the history lesson, the briefing from the godfathers of CCHL?
Nothing, that's what I said.
So it'd be nothing
No,
in that?
so they can be part of that value strategy.
So then the question would be, why would Gary ask us to just receive this and not make the decision prior to having that briefing?
Because picking up on listening to Gary's thing, he also thought you were making a decision today to go ahead with this, because he also made the comment about that that this should be discussed as part of a LTP. So I'm not too sure if he was quite clear about what we were actually asking for today.
Right.
And as we've made it clear in the recommendations, is we're actually asking for us to go and do some more work. One of those things will be the value strategy, which, as I've said, we can include the three gentlemen that he mentioned to be part of that initial thing, to give you the history lesson. So there's nothing today, a decision today, that will stop us being able to do that.
Okay, and have you had any communication about when that history lesson might be?
Once we have had if we have a decision to proceed today, I will very quickly get a timeline into your wonderful diaries for early next year to actually start those workshops, because there is a bit of work that we need to do. in parallel to that, we will be working through and next week I'll bring to the council recommendation for a panel in regards to start the director's appointments process. Noting you will all have to approve any recommended appointments, so they can run in parallel.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because it'll be good to not get that history lesson halfway or 2/3 of the way
Nope.
through.
We'll make sure it's on the first session for you.
Yeah. Great. Excellent.
Pauline.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the director appointments process is just one resolution in here, so it's not caught up with the whole thing. So that could be voted on separately or not.
If you choose to
Yeah,
vote
that's
on them
right.
separately, you
Yep.
can do that.
And then I have a question too, Leah, is 3B. Just wondering if you could just explain that to me a little bit more. Modify the statement of expectations process to be a more comprehensive 3-year process based on a 10-year planning horizon, which becomes part of the LTP process. Does that mean that we would only issue a letter of expectation every 3 years?
Yeah, yes, that would be the intention, and it would be a much more comprehensive document and set of expectations than currently exists. That's not to say that clearly in the interim some things change, and for unexpected or extraordinary issues, there would need to be a process to fold those changes into the standing expectations.
And we just to clarify on that, we have you can always do if there is things that crop up in that period, you can actually do a letter, right, to say, look, there's a couple of things that we want you to really focus on at the moment.
Yep.
The reason and the logic behind where the Northerners have got in regards to using the statement of expectations in line with a 3-year process is because actually that way it will align to your strategic outcomes that you are actually setting. And it brings that, but then you can also put more targeted measures and requests into it.
Yep.
And in the report, I think there were some examples that they said.
So currently we've been issuing them every year.
Currently, we've been last year we issued a enduring statement of expectations, which was talking more about the relationships and things like that. No surprises, and a lot of those key things that we sent out to all our CCOs, and we have been doing a letter of expectations. But the comments from the Northington team in the report was that it tends to be more focused, real annual, real granular, whereas actually it should be more some strategic and more targeted,
Yes,
which is why it should be aligned to your outcomes.
Yeah, and so that's part of the recommendations in the report that we do a lot more work on that. And so the returning statement of intent, is that only once every 3 years as well?
The statement of intent is issued every year.
Every year, that's okay.
Yeah, but it is for a 3-year period.
Yeah, thank you.
Tyrone.
Thanks, Phil. Not so much a question, but just to you, I think that what we're talking about has got such big implications for our city, and our people want us to make good decisions on their behalf, and not rush things, and I feel like it's being a bit rushed. So I would like to propose or move that the item being discussed, item 19, should lie on the table until such a time and not be discussed any further until such a time as the council's got the opportunity to meet with David Stock and Bruce Irvine, but not limited to them, and others, just to be able to clarify and understand a bit better the decision that we are making with the proper historical context.
Tyrone, could we put the director piece first?
Leah, the process can carry on and we can still take into account what Gary was suggesting if we wanted.
Yeah, that was what when Councillor Kewan asked before. The point of the decision today is actually.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry?
We are in questions, aren't we? I asked you a question, but Tyrone's one wasn't a question, so carry on.
So am I allowed to answer?
Yeah, far away. I asked you a question.
Oh, okay. So just in response to Councillor Kewan's question before, getting the Bruce Irvine and David and Gary in to talk about some of that history does not need to wait till you make this decision today, because it will feed into your value strategy. Remember, the decision today is just saying we want to actually go ahead and do more information and set it up so that we can actually do this work. putting it on the table and not making a decision today, it will actually hold up the ultimate process, which will mean when you actually have the information, once you've done your work, which can be informed by that, then you won't have the time to actually consider it effectively.
I mean, the main part of what I was saying earlier is that I feel like the process has been too rushed. Like, we're getting information with very little time to respond to it, and I think that we need more time to consider it. Hence, why I would move that we let it lie on the table, so that until such a time as we can do all the things that we want to.
Need to take the rest of the questions from the floor.
Yeah, we'll just finish doing the questions. And the next one is from Sarah.
Thanks.
Mignani.
A couple of follow-ups. Would you recommend appointing directors to CCHL before we know what the direction of travel is and the work? So, if the move is to let this lie on the table, then would you recommend appointing directors, or would you recommend that we waited until after?
So if the no decision is made today, as per the recommendations, I don't know if you could appoint. There's no point appointing directors.
And so then we would have no council directors on CCHL for some period of time until...
Well, you can appoint councillor directors if you choose.
Yeah.
But it's very hard to, when you're appointing any directors, to actually go, well, what are you actually wanting them to do? The point of this is to go appoint the directors or go to the market, and including the councillor directors, to actually get the skill sets that you need to actually undertake this work.
Yeah.
Point of order. Do we have a procedural motion on the table or not? Like, this is looking, maybe we could get Helen's advice.
We're just getting
Right
advice.
about now.
It just seems
doing
like
it
the
right now.
conversation's running
Yeah,
and we're
so-
supposed to be.
Yep.
It is a procedural motion. I'd also like to make sure that we have really clear staff advice on the implications of going with that
Hence
motion.
why the members getting their questions out, so at least you can hear the questions, and then before we deal with anything else, we'll be able to advise on Tyrone's point.
I'm just wondering if that's proper.
That's
I'm
what
failing
just-
to see how the director.
The next
No,
question.
there's a procedure on the table.
The next question is Yanni.
Thanks. Thank you. It was really a question around the report. And I guess I was just concerned that we don't seem to have much assessment of the risk around. You talk about in the report. It talks about the ESG, companies doing more of that, and no evidence. In fact, evidence that private companies probably are doing it more than public companies. I think there's a reference to a research report. But in the example that we've had in Christchurch, where Hutchison Ports Holdings was looking to have an operating model of our port, which is one of the options that you've also identified. There's no sort of risk assessment around industrial relations, and I just wondered, given the sort of extreme examples where we've seen in Australia, workers being sacked with a day's notice via text message. We've seen things like 0-hour contracts. We've seen a whole bunch of quite poor treatment of workers. Why there's not more of a kind of analysis of that impact on us? And I know that we've had historic industrial relations issues at our port, but over recent history, it seems to have been pretty good.
We're definitely not suggesting that shouldn't be addressed, but I guess the question is, in terms of order of operations, that's part of the scope of the scoping studies from the subsidiary companies. What are their options? What are those key issues that need to be addressed and dealt with through that process, so that council can make an informed decision as to the way forward. So that was never part of the scope of our report, but it's definitely something that needs to be covered off in the next stage.
Like, is there, in terms of the bigger picture though, in terms of the risk assessment or the analysis of the ESGs, where did labour disputes, industrial relations feature?
Again, that would be part of the scope of the next step. It was never part of the scope of this report.
Right, okay. And then just the other question, because you've sort of made reference to us comparatively with other councils around New Zealand in terms of things like the rates impact. Have you done a benchmark if we didn't have the earthquake, what our position would look like in terms of how we would compare?
No, we haven't, and obviously that's a counterfactual which is fairly difficult to deal with. The fact is that the earthquake happened. We can't normalise or rationalise that away, and that is part of the history and the background to CCHL and CCC. But in terms of trying to normalise that out of an analysis, that would be a counterfactual, which would be speculative at best.
Right. But we would have had, like, I mean, I don't know if staff have looked at that, but we would have had 10-year budgets. We would have had, pre-earthquake an analysis, the kind of expectation of what we were spending versus the kind of additional costs.
Yeah, and to be fair, council had no debt in 2009 either. So it's. I think the point is it's like, yes, you can go back and do some analysis, but it's sort of a bit irrelevant because we have had the earthquakes and it has happened. So it's what's the outcome you're actually trying to understand?
I guess the concern I have with the report is it seems to paint a picture of CCHL underperforming, but we've had a massive earthquake and had huge additional costs, and I guess some of the other people who have raised it and the deputation raised it, is if we hadn't had CCHL and we hadn't had the good performance that they were bringing to us, then the situation that we would be in would be far worse. And we don't really have any sense of that in here around the benefit that we had because of the public ownership of CCHL and the way that we had it with the impact of the earthquake. So that's what I was just trying to understand.
Once he's finished questions, then.
I think the first point in terms of our assessment of CCHL performance being poor, I don't think we say that at all. We think that CCHL has performed reasonably well, and with some exceptions, the subsidiary companies have performed well as well. So it's not as a result of poor performance that we've then determined that the strategy should change. It's in the context of the overall council position and CCHL position.
Thank you. Melanie?
Two questions. First one, though, is just with this motion of Tyrone's. Should we be waiting for the advice before we carry on?
You ready, Helen?
And then I have another question that's actually related.
So in terms of the procedural motion which the councillor raised, reference to Standing Order 20.2, which talks about closing or adjourning a debate, that at E, that the item being discussed should lie on the table and not be further discussed at the meeting. My interpretation of that is we are not currently in debate. We're still in the question part of the meeting. And my view would be that once the report has been moved and seconded, which it's not currently being moved and seconded, is that would be the point that a procedural motion under that section would apply.
Thank you.
A quick question for the help with the group going forward. Would we not be better in future to table something and then ask questions as opposed to what we do, which in my view is quite poor, where we ask lots of questions before anything's tabled and can lead to this situation? It would make it a lot clearer.
If we get the substantive on the table properly, like under a normal system, and then you can put the other one forward if you get a seconder, which I'm supposing you will.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Jay, I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Would we not be better to, before we open items up for discussion, move them and second them so that they're on the table and then questions could be asked? Or
That's one way of doing it, yes.
Yeah, I've got one. Melanie's got one more question.
My question is, so for those resolutions in number 2, so there's developing a value strategy, right? Doesn't, to me, it makes sense that we would work out a clear value strategy, and then once we know what that is, if we haven't even discussed it, we would then look at what type of portfolio and the way of managing it would something that would flow out of that, rather than today deciding what type of, I mean, I know we're looking into the details and getting the information, but we're kind of, this is already going a step along the way, making a decision partway down how we might approach the whole CCHL companies when we haven't even worked out a value strategy. And to me, that just seems like that would be something that would fall out of it in a few months' time, or however long it takes to actually do that work.
No, I mean, what you're actually asking today is for the work to be done so you can consider that. So you need to do the value strategy as part of that. But in regards to, so let's go through. So this gets passed today, we set it up, you do your value strategy work, you inform CCHL of that, they've got their new direct board in place, they go and do the work, and they bring it back to you with a lot of options. At that point, you can go, actually, we like status quo. Right? This doesn't eliminate anything. All this is doing, the only thing this is essentially eliminating is that we don't want to liquidate the assets, because we can't do that anyway. It's got to go through to an LTP. This gives you the options, but it gives you the work to be done to actually inform that. All this is saying is that actually that the Northington's review has indicated that there is enough for you to actually consider that some work needs to be done on that. This is all this is asking for.
But this option, the hybrid approach, is a mixture of rebalancing and returning capital to council. Now, what if we want to look at just rebalancing? That isn't actually an option here. That hasn't been put forward as something. I would have thought if we were going to look at all options, all of that range would be there.
Our recommendation is a spectrum between rebalance and reduce, and would sort of expect that after the scoping studies, the ideal setting would fall somewhere between those, but it could fall at totally one end. It could fall, you might actually look at the opportunities within the CCHL portfolio for co-investment and in new assets, and determine actually there's much more value for the council and ratepayers by pursuing a rebalance only approach.
So what we're saying is that you're not eliminating any by this recommendation. All we're saying is that you want to have the options that cover both, so you can actually make some decisions.
Yeah, that wasn't clear, which is why I asked that question and earlier as well, because it does read hybrid as a mixture of both, as opposed to being a spectrum between either one or the other, a mix in between, and that's not clear in the resolution.
You change it.
Tyler?
The question, it was on the rebalancing, and it feels like the rebalancing model doesn't give it credit by itself, because it includes, it's a hybrid model including rebalancing and returning capital to council. That essentially was what the hybrid model is. So what I would actually consider is actually having it as, I say, for example, if 2B passes, which I'm very hesitant on, might I add, as a young person who has an inherent distrust for government and now being in government, it is very hard for me to make decisions. And to be honest with you, I've actually lost sleep over 2B in itself, because here I am thinking about asking for those that come after us, and that's what I've gone on for the whole year. So that is making me very hesitant. But I am very open to looking at a rebalancing model which continues to provide return on our portfolios and looks everywhere else. But what are your thoughts on turning that into a 2C and looking at the rebalancing model in itself?
So having a third option, you're meaning?
Potentially, yes.
So just consider the cost and benefits of adopting only rebalancing. That would have something that you'd have to put up as an amendment, I'd imagine. I'm looking at process. Is that right?
Can I move an amendment?
Not yet.
Cool.
Sam,
I'll do it in debate. Don't worry. Yeah,
okay.
I got
Sam.
What I was just wondering was, in terms of helping Tyrone with the motion he mentioned before, perhaps what I could do is move the recommendation if we had a seconder, which then gives us the ability to debate what you mentioned before, Tyrone.
Well, you don't debate.
Well, not debate, but put it to the table.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking in terms of where we're at as a council. I can hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
So if I'm moving the staff recommendation,
I'll second it.
And Phil second it, and then if you, and you'll second it, yeah. Or Sarah could. Yep.
No, far away. Sarah second.
So Sarah's going to second it.
Can
Can we just get the wording for Tyrone's just literally leaving the report laying on the table?
Now, yeah.
Are you happy to move it with the addition of the public AGMs?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if we could
yeah,
add,
for sure.
I've already sent that through to Sam,
Okay.
so we could
Now, just for everyone's information,
4, 5 and
we've
6.
got 3 amendments that Pauline put up. Number 4, can you see that number 4 up?
Nope, can't see
Can you
anything.
put it on the, thank you.
And Leah will be able, I think we do 99% of number 4 already, and if you'd just like to talk to that a little bit, please, Leah.
Sure. So yeah, so like in the F&P report every month in public, we actually, as part of our finance overview, we actually have a whole treasury section which talks about our gross borrowings and our on lending, which is the most of the CCHL debt, and talks about our compliance with our rates. If we're wanting more detail on that, I'm happy to provide a more detailed briefing for the members and I think we actually had one in the schedule at some stage on Treasury, on talking about hedging ratios and the cost of borrowing considerations. Happy to do that anytime.
It's very little extra if it'll work for you to be able to do what's in there. So the second one is, who is that more? Helen.
Yes, that's just a follow through from the training that was provided as part of the induction program, and I'm happy to ask that question of the Officer of the Auditor General as well.
Okay. And the third one, who wants to talk to that? Me?
Yes.
I don't. We have got enough. At the moment, Sarah and Andrew are on there until 7th of this
7th or 8th of January, or
somewhere
whatever
January.
the election was. When was the election?
If we haven't done the new appointments by then, which we won't have, they could fall off there, and it doesn't matter. We have got enough directors left to be able to do what we do. But if I'm not losing any sleep over the fact if Andrew is on there for one more month, it's not the end of the world as far as I'm concerned. So is everyone sort of supportive of that? So what I was hoping to do was to throw Pauline's amendments into the substantive and do the whole lot in one hit, but we have got a couple of extra little bits, have we, Samuel?
Sarah?
Sorry, we're just having a quick chat out, see whether we can get something that
Do you want to have a wee break and sort it out?
Shall we have 5 minutes and we'll have a cup of tea and we'll see you back here. 10 minutes at max. Thank you.